In a way, we've had our place in the sun. The British Empire came and went. The Western world, led by the United States, is in some ways in decline. I mean, there are many good things about Western democracy, and American technology is very vibrant. But what is clearly happening is that the center of economic gravity of the world is shifting to Asia, particularly to China and India, who are emerging as sort of economic superpowers. And in a sense, my book is explaining how this has happened and what the world will look like in a generation's time when China and India probably will be the dominant economies.
And what do you see as the reasons behind this growth in China and India?
Well, it's partly, these were once great civilizations, and they went through, in India's case, a period of colonial rule, and China, a century of humiliation. They've rebuilt post-independence India and its planning system, and then market liberalization, and in China's case, some horrors under the communist government, but certainly within the last few decades after Deng Xiaoping, remarkable period of opening up and reform and a successful economic growth. And as a result, they're gradually taking a bigger and bigger share of the world economy. And in China's case, it is now a superpower matching the United States, certainly in manufacturing and in most of the emerging technologies.
And in terms of what you see as the diminished impact of the West, is that simply by contrast to the level of growth, or is there a decline there? And if so, what is the reason for that?
Well, it is relative decline. Our living standards are not falling, for many individuals they are. I think the Western world has been through a very serious crisis since 2008, the collapse of the banking system. I've often likened it to a sort of economic heart attack, and it's done serious damage. And since then, we've had COVID, we've had the Ukraine war, and in Britain's case, Brexit, all of which have added to the problems. I don't want to exaggerate. There are many good things happening in the Western world, in the UK in particular. I don't want to run it down, but the simple fact is that you have these big emerging powers, Asia generally, more economically dynamic. Catching up is a big factor. These are still agricultural countries that are becoming industrial and now becoming post-industrial. So, and in China's case, actually getting ahead of global technologies as well.
And you've spoken about these big economic superpowers, but also the rest of the countries caught in the middle of this and the pressure to choose between the superpowers and to navigate this. So how do you see countries navigating, such as the UK, for example?
Well, it is difficult because, particularly with the Trump administration, governments have been put on the spot on choose A or choose B, which is not healthy. I mean, I think what we should be doing, I speak in the UK, and I think this is true of the European Union, we should be hedging our bets. Of course, we need good, close relationships with the United States, not least because they provide us with military protection in NATO. It's difficult with Trump bullying, but nonetheless, we have a relationship there. It's important to maintain it. But I believe we should be hedging as far as we can, working with the Chinese. After all, we live on the same planet. We have common problems, climate change. They have the technologies. They're also contributing to the problems. But, we're potentially partners, however uncomfortable. And also, they're a vast market. And a lot of, certainly British companies have done extremely well there. My former employer, Shell, is a very good example of that. Which is how I got interested in China in the first place.
You've spoken as well about the breakdown in global cooperation and perhaps the breakdown in the rules-based world order. So how inevitable do you see this being? Is this where we're headed to what you've described as potentially a multipolar world?
Well, it's a danger. I don't think we should be too despairing about it, but what essentially has happened is that the world has done extremely well since the Second World War. I know we've had, there've been wars, there've been crises, but by and large, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. World trade has expanded. We've become a much more integrated world, and that's by and large for the good. And much of that was done under American leadership. The Americans are now stepping back from that, particularly with Trump making this very clear that America doesn't want to rule the world. They just want to look after their own area. And somebody has to step up and give a leadership role on things like climate change, for example, where the Chinese are probably the dominant power. They've got the technology. They're also the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide. India is coming up fast. But unless we get new kind of cooperative agreements to deal with international trade, coordination of economic policies, pandemics, and environmental issues, there is a great danger that we have a series of disasters, and we'll have to remake the international system from a poor position. Hopefully we can avoid that.
You mentioned sort of that sort of angle, the autocratic powers. The West has an admittedly shaky claim to being the sort of global arbiter of human rights. So how will this diminished impact affect that?
Well, human rights is a tricky issue when you're dealing with China. I mean, they will say, and there's some support for that, in many human rights, economic and social rights, the people are advancing. They also provide the public with a sense of security. Of course, they don't have the right to vote. They don't have a free press. My experience in China is that providing people don't cross red lines, organize public protests, they can have a reasonably free life. And it's an authoritarian system. It's not a totalitarian system like the former Soviet Union under Stalin or North Korea. It's not quite as bad as that. But yeah, there's no escaping the fact that Western concepts of human rights are not shared in China.
You briefly touched upon the role of Europe as well. So where does Europe place in all of this?
Well, very sadly, Europe's not in great shape. I mean, I'm a lifelong committed European. I want Europe to be more cohesive, to work together, to be more united, to be a force in the world, because I think European values, things I believe in. But I think particularly since Brexit, a lot of momentum has been lost. You're getting more and more squabbling. It's very difficult to get a consensus. Countries like Hungary seem to have a kind of veto over doing things that need to be done, such as supporting Ukraine in the war with Russia. So unfortunately, unless it gets its mojo back, Europe is not going to be a big player in this new world.
And to bring it locally, how do you see a place like Gibraltar, a fairly small place, an economy such as Gibraltar, can navigate this global economic landscape that you're setting up?
Well, the Gibraltarians have been extremely skillful in managing to maintain a sense of identity and a genuinely independent way of life with a lot of hostile neighbours. But I think, as I understand it, the working arrangement has been reached with Spain. You maintain good relationships with North African countries. You have the link with Britain. And everything I've seen in Gibraltar, this is a sort of happy place and well run, and a good example to us all about how you can be small and independent in a rather turbulent, hostile world.
As a lifelong fan of, or rather enthusiast of Europe, I can imagine what your answer might be to this, but what do you see as the importance of the treaty agreement to Gibraltar, the future relationship treaty agreement to Gibraltar reached post-Brexit?
It's terribly important. When I first came here, I came to Gibraltar during the European elections, 6-7 years ago. And a lot of people were very worried about the future. There was serious uncertainty, and that uncertainty now seems to be largely resolved. Having good, clear relationship with your big next-door neighbour is terribly important for, obviously, trade, people going backwards and forwards. And if you've managed to settle that, that really is a big step forward. I mean, this is a small place, but it's got a great future, and I think that underlines it.
And one final question, how has your experience of Gibraltar been, and of the Literary Festival on this trip here?
No, it's been wonderful, and I will very strongly encourage other people to come. I think that you've had a couple of ex-politicians, Jeremy Hunt and myself, and several well-known authors in Britain. It's the first time I've been to a literary festival outside the UK. It's been a really great experience with wonderful hospitality and very engaged audiences, very interested audiences. And so from my point of view, if I'm given a chance, I will happily promote you back in the UK.